The Thompson family lived in a peaceful suburban neighborhood, where everyone knew each other by name. Their two-story brick house, with its neatly trimmed lawn and white picket fence, was the kind that people admired when passing by. John Thompson, a software engineer in his early 40s, had built a solid reputation as a reliable professional and a devoted husband. Linda, his wife of 17 years, was equally admired for her warmth and her involvement in local charities and school events. Together, they had one daughter, Emily, a bright and sociable 15-year-old who seemed to have inherited the best qualities of both her parents. From the outside, the Thompsons appeared to be the perfect family. They went to church on Sundays, hosted barbecues in the summer, and always showed up to support Emily's school events. Photos of vacations, birthdays, and holidays lined their living room walls, each image a symbol of stability and love. But, like many families who seem picture-perfect on the surface, the reality behind closed doors was not as flawless as it appeared. Over the past few months, Linda had started to feel something was off. It wasn't dramatic, just small things that only someone deeply familiar with a person's habits would notice. John, who used to share every detail about his day, had grown distant. He'd often return home later than usual, claiming meetings had run long or traffic was unbearable. When Linda pressed for details, he would brush off her concerns with vague explanations. At first, she convinced herself that he was simply stressed at work, but the unease lingered. Emily, on the other hand, had recently become close friends with a new girl at school named Mia. The two girls were inseparable, studying together, texting constantly, and even having weekend sleepovers. Mia was polite, well-mannered, and seemed to adore Emily's family, especially John. She often complimented Linda's cooking and would engage in long conversations with John about books and technology, subjects Emily had little interest in. Linda found their closeness a bit unusual, but she dismissed it, telling herself that it was just the enthusiasm of a young girl who looked up to adults. Despite these subtle changes, Linda continued with her daily routine, maintaining the household, organizing community fundraisers, and being a supportive mother. Still, she couldn't shake the growing sense that something wasn't quite right. She began to pay closer attention to John's behavior, how he seemed unusually nervous when Mia was around, how he would avoid eye contact when Linda asked about his day, and how he always had an excuse for being on his phone late at night. But Linda didn't want to be the suspicious wife. She valued trust and believed in giving her husband the benefit of the doubt. What she didn't know was that behind those late nights, secret glances, and unexplained absences, a truth was beginning to fester beneath the surface of their home. One that would soon shatter their family's image and expose a betrayal too painful to imagine. As the weeks passed, Linda's suspicions grew stronger, but she continued to push them aside, trying to convince herself that she was simply overthinking things. After all, John had always been a devoted husband and father. They had been through so much together, and their life together had seemed stable for so long. Yet the inconsistencies started to stack up in a way she couldn't ignore. It began with John's increasing number of late nights. At first, Linda attributed it to his demanding job as a software engineer, which often required him to work overtime on complex projects. But soon, the late nights became more frequent, and his explanations grew less convincing. One evening, he came home late and barely looked at her when he walked in. Instead of greeting Linda as he usually did, he muttered a quick, distracted, "Hello," before heading straight for the shower. It was unlike him. John had always been affectionate and communicative, but these small signs of distance were starting to build up. Linda also noticed the small things. John's phone, which he used to leave lying around carelessly, was now constantly with him. He had even started taking it with him to the bathroom, something that Linda had never thought much of before. He would often lock the door when using his phone or computer, and the few times Linda asked to borrow it, he would quickly change the subject or offer a vague excuse. One afternoon, while doing laundry, Linda found a small folded piece of paper tucked into the corner of the couch. It was a handwritten note from Mia, Emily's friend, addressed to John. The note seemed innocuous at first, a simple thank you for some help with a school project. But as Linda unfolded it, she noticed the tone of the writing. It wasn't just a note of gratitude. It was personal. There was an undercurrent of familiarity in the way Mia had written it, something that felt more intimate than what was appropriate for a teenage girl to send to an adult, especially the father of her best friend. That night, Linda confronted John about the note. He brushed it off with a nervous laugh, claiming it was just a harmless gesture from Mia, who was always overly appreciative. Linda didn't buy it, but she didn't push the issue further either. She told herself that she was just imagining things, that there was no reason to jump to conclusions. But deep down, something wasn't sitting right. The final straw came a few days later. Linda had been feeling increasingly uneasy, so she decided to take a different route home from grocery shopping one evening. When she passed by the park, she noticed John's car parked on the far side, far from the usual spots. Curiosity piqued. She parked her car nearby and quietly approached. Through the trees, she could see John talking to Mia, their faces close, their body language too familiar for comfort. Her heart sank as she watched them. They were laughing, exchanging glances that seemed far too personal. The way they interacted felt wrong, like there was a hidden connection that Linda had never been aware of. Linda's stomach twisted as she turned to leave, her mind racing with the implications of what she had just witnessed. She didn't want to believe it, but the pieces were starting to fall into place. She couldn't ignore the sinking feeling that something far more sinister was unfolding before her eyes, something that threatened to destroy everything she thought. She knew about her husband and their family. The following days were a blur of confusion and growing dread. Linda tried to act as though everything was normal, but the image of John and Mia together in the park haunted her mind. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong, and yet she couldn't bring herself to confront John directly. She wasn't sure what she would say, or even what she was hoping to find. Part of her still wanted to believe that she was wrong, that she had misinterpreted what she saw. But the more she thought about it, the more the small pieces of the puzzle fell into place. The late nights, the locked phone, the sudden closeness between John and Mia. It all seemed too coincidental to be brushed aside. Linda's mind raced as she considered every interaction, every odd moment she had dismissed in the past as insignificant. There was no denying it now. Something was going on. But what? Linda's thoughts turned to Mia. The young girl had been a fixture in their home for the past few months, always around when Emily was home. At first, she had seemed like a sweet, well-mannered teenager who got along well with everyone. But Linda began to see her in a different light now. She couldn't ignore how Mia always seemed to gravitate toward John, seeking his attention with a sense of familiarity that was out of place for a family friend. She noticed how Mia would laugh a little too loudly at John's jokes, how she would sit a little too close to him during dinners, and how she often lingered in the kitchen, chatting with him while Linda was busy elsewhere. It wasn't obvious, at least not to anyone who wasn't paying close attention. But to Linda, It was unmistakable. Determined to get to the bottom of things, Linda took a more active approach. One evening, when John was out for yet another late meeting, she decided to go through his personal things. It wasn't something she had ever done before. She valued trust and had always believed in giving John his space. But something inside her told her that she needed to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Linda started with John's desk, which was cluttered with papers, receipts, and various gadgets. She sifted through the stacks, but it was the drawer where he kept his personal belongings that caught her attention. She hesitated for a moment, but then opened it. Inside, she found several receipts for expensive dinners at high-end restaurants, all dated over the past few months. What caught Linda's eye, however, was the small folded card tucked at the bottom of the drawer. It was a birthday card from Mia, addressed to John. Linda's fingers trembled as she opened it, her heart racing. The message inside was far too personal, too intimate for someone who was supposed to be nothing more than a friend of the family. The card read, "To my favorite person. I can't thank you enough for always being there for me. You mean the world to me, and I'm lucky to have you in my life, love, Mia." Linda felt a wave of nausea rise in her chest. The words were innocent on the surface, but the underlying tone was unmistakable. Mia's feelings for John were not those of a grateful teenager, but of someone who saw him as more than just a friend. Linda's mind raced, her breath coming faster as she processed what she had found. She knew now, she knew everything. The images in the park, the note from Mia, and now this card. It all painted a clear picture, one that shattered her entire world. The betrayal was beyond anything Linda could have imagined. Her husband, the man she had trusted for nearly 2 decades, was having an affair with her daughter's best friend. The weight of the discovery pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She had thought she was prepared for the truth, but nothing could have prepared her for this. In the midst of the overwhelming pain and anger, Linda knew one thing for sure. She couldn't let this go. She had to confront John, had to expose the lies that had been festering in their marriage. But as the reality of the situation set in, Linda realized that this was only the beginning of a nightmare she wasn't sure she was ready to face. Linda spent the next few days in a fog of shock and disbelief. The truth about John and Mia seemed impossible to process. Every moment she had shared with him, every smile, every reassuring word, now felt like a lie. She was consumed by anger, hurt, and a deep sense of betrayal that left her feeling hollow. Despite the emotional whirlwind, Linda knew she couldn't let this go without confronting John. The longer she waited, the more the sense of betrayal gnawed at her, and she could feel the weight of the secret growing heavier with each passing day. But she couldn't just confront him without knowing everything. She needed to understand the full extent of what was happening, how long this had been going on, how deep the affair ran, and why Mia, of all people, was involved. Linda couldn't. Stop thinking about the note, the card, and the way Mia had looked at John in the park. She had always assumed Mia saw John as a father figure, someone who provided guidance and support. But now it was clear that something far more sinister had been brewing behind the scenes. But what was Mia's role in all of this? Was she the instigator, or was she being manipulated by someone else? With no answers, Linda took it upon herself to dig deeper. She started by examining John's phone records. It was a difficult decision. She knew it was a violation of his privacy, but at that point, Linda felt she had no other choice. She went through his recent calls and messages, each one revealing an unsettling pattern. There were countless late-night messages exchanged between John and Mia, messages that were overly familiar and in some cases flirtatious. Linda's stomach churned as she read through them, her hands trembling. What she found confirmed what she had already suspected. Their relationship had gone far beyond mere friendship. But it didn't stop there. Linda knew she had to investigate. Further, so she turned her attention to the financial records. She checked John's bank statements, searching for any signs of spending that might indicate a deeper connection with Mia. What she discovered shook her to the core. There were multiple large transactions, hotel stays, expensive gifts, and meals at upscale restaurants, all linked to Mia. Linda's heart pounded as she realized that these weren't just casual meetings or innocent outings. They were part of a carefully planned and executed affair. John had been spending large sums of money on Mia, going to great lengths to hide their relationship from her. Linda's world seemed to collapse further as she pieced together the final bit of the puzzle. She discovered that Mia's family background was far more complicated than she had initially realized. Mia had come from a broken home, with a father who was absent and a mother who had struggled with addiction. It was clear now that Mia's connection with John wasn't just about infatuation. It was about seeking something she hadn't found at home. Linda couldn't help but feel a strange mix of sympathy and anger toward Mia. She was a victim of her circumstances, but that didn't excuse the damage she had caused. As Linda sat there staring at the screen, she felt a sense of urgency. She could no longer sit idly by, pretending that everything was fine. John's betrayal ran deeper than she had ever imagined, and the implications for their family were profound. Linda knew that she couldn't just confront him without preparing herself for the inevitable fallout. This wasn't just about an affair. It was about her family, her daughter, and everything they had built together. The next time John came home, Linda was ready. The air in the house felt thick with tension, and the silence between them was deafening. Linda had already made up her mind. She would expose everything. No more secrets, no more lies. The truth would come out, no matter how painful it would be. And though she was terrified of what might happen next, Linda knew she had to face it head on. The truth was the only thing that could set her free. The confrontation was inevitable, and when it finally came, Linda felt a cold sense of resolve that she hadn't known she possessed. She had spent days, even weeks, processing the lies, the evidence, and the weight of the betrayal. She had gathered everything she needed, the messages, the receipts, the cards. There was no denying what had been happening. Linda was no longer the trusting wife, standing by her husband through thick and thin. She was a woman who had been blindsided by a truth so brutal, so raw, that it left her questioning everything she had ever known about love, loyalty, and trust. When John walked through the door that evening, she knew it was time. He looked at her with that familiar, somewhat distant expression, as if nothing was wrong. Linda stood by the kitchen counter, holding the pile of evidence she had compiled. Her heart was pounding, her mind racing, but she knew this was her moment. There would be no more pretending, no more wondering. She had to expose him for what he had become. At first, John seemed confused by the intensity of her stare. But as Linda placed the items in front of him, the birthday card, the phone records, the receipts, his face slowly shifted from confusion to defensiveness. He stammered, trying to justify himself, But Linda had already seen enough. She had already processed the truth that had been hidden from her for so long. As he tried to explain away his actions, Linda felt a sickening sense of finality. There was no excuse for what he had done. His explanations were empty, each word a feeble attempt to cover up a betrayal that went far deeper than mere infidelity. John's face flushed with panic as the weight of his lies began to set in. He tried to shift the blame, suggesting that Mia had come onto him, that he had never meant for things to go as far as they had. But Linda wasn't listening anymore. She had seen the messages, the way he had played both sides of this twisted game. She knew he was lying, and that realization only made the pain worse. How could someone she had loved so deeply, someone she had trusted with her whole heart, betray her and their daughter in such a way? As the truth spilled out, Linda felt a strange numbness take over. Her anger had given way to a quiet, resigned sadness. She didn't want to hear his excuses, didn't want to listen to his pleas for forgiveness. Nothing he said could undo the damage that had been done, and Linda was no longer the woman who would forgive and forget. She had been broken, and the pieces of their marriage were beyond repair. The worst part, though, was the thought of Emily. Linda's mind raced to the possible repercussions of this betrayal on their daughter. How would she ever explain this to her? How could she tell Emily that the man she had looked up to, the father she had adored, had not only broken their family but had done so with her best friend? The weight of that thought hit Linda harder than anything else. It was no longer just about her. It was about protecting Emily from the aftermath of John's actions. John, desperate and frantic, promised to make things right. He begged for another chance, swore he would do anything to fix their family. But Linda knew that nothing would ever be the same. The trust between them had been shattered beyond repair, and every word that came from his mouth felt like a hollow promise. She was done. The love she had for him had turned into something unrecognizable, and as much as it hurt, she knew she had to let go. The fallout from that moment was swift and unforgiving. Word of the affair quickly spread throughout their social circle, leaving Linda feeling exposed and vulnerable. She became the subject of whispered conversations at PTA meetings, social gatherings, and among their mutual friends. The weight of judgment from others felt unbearable, but Linda didn't care anymore. She had made her decision. She was done. Hiding from the truth and the reality of John's betrayal had given her a clarity she hadn't known she needed. As for Emily, the confrontation with John would be the hardest thing Linda would ever face. But as much as she feared the impact it would have on her daughter, she knew the truth had to come out. There could be no more secrets, no more lies. And though the future was uncertain, Linda was determined to rebuild her life, on her terms. The road ahead would be difficult, but she knew she was stronger than she had ever realized. And this time, she wouldn't let the lies destroy her.